That is Kim Yong-chol arriving at the White House, and he will be met by John Kelly and John Bolton. This is the shot outside the White House right now. I'm joined by our national political director. He's going to help us weigh in on this. Rick Klein, are you here with us?
Yeah. Hey, Zachary. How are you?
So what are we looking at right now?
Well, right now we're looking at the arrival of the North Korean emissary, the highest-ranking emissary from North Korea to enter the White House in 18 years since the year 2000. A roughly similar event happened under President Bill Clinton. But this time, the stakes are quite high, and we understand that he will go into the Oval Office and meet at least briefly with President Trump. And according to the president, the president plans to receive a letter from Kim Jong-un himself. Unknown what the contents of this letter are, what it means exactly, but this is presumably a response to the president's letter of just more than a week ago. Hard to believe, but it was just more than a week ago that the president called this summit off. He said that this June 12 planned meeting in Singapore would not be happening. He was citing the bellicose behavior and language of the North Koreans. Since that time, a strange thing has happened, which is both sides are pretending or acting as if this summit is actually on, which to me suggests that, that both sides see that there's a lot riding on it. So I think the expectation is a more conciliatory tone in this letter that would lead to the reinstatement of a summit that's just 2 weeks away.
Now you're seeing them again walk through the colonnade. I mean, beyond the fact that it's good TV, I think that it really plays to the president's ego here, right? Just a week ago, he was saying that this thing was off, but at the same time said, you know, you can call, you can write, there's a way to make this right. And here they are showing up at the White House with this handwritten letter. Have we ever seen anything just quite like this?
Well, yeah, he had that call me maybe moment last week, and it does appear that Kim Jong-un has responded to that. So if you're the president, or if you're the president's defenders, people that explain the president's behavior, believe in the president's behavior, they say, look, this shows that he's the master negotiator. This is part of the plan all along. We all covered and we all saw the language that the president used to say this thing is off. We were told by national security officials in the ensuing days that it would be very difficult to reinstate in as short a period of time. But it does appear that there were all sorts of machinations that continued. A delegation in Singapore on the site of the potential summit, as well as this unusual trip by the top North Korean official to the United States, meetings in New York yesterday with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and now the journey down to Washington to hand-deliver this letter. You're right about the optics of it, and I think the extraordinary theater that's involved in hand-delivering a letter has a lot to do with it. And to me, it's just another indication that both President Trump and Kim Jong-un understand the public perceptions around these things. They understand the power of the imagery that surrounds meetings and moments like this.
You know, as we look at some of these visuals, Rick, I'm wondering if you can help both myself and some of our viewers understand where they are in the White House and exactly where they're headed. Do you have a little lay of the land?
Sure. Well, the colonnade that you referenced is just outside the Oval Office. That part of the working part of the White House is actually quite a small building. When you see the shots of the photographers moving around on the other side, that's where they're kept. This is the more formal ceremonial entrance to the White House. You also see the president leave the White House through this area when he gets on that helicopter to head off to Andrews Air Force Base. It is not as functional a use as it is a ceremonial use, and I think the pageantry of it suggests that they wanted this to be seen by the cameras. There are ways to get in and out of the White House without us noticing. That happens all the time. This is not one of them. This is much more about the grandeur of the White House and receiving a distinguished guest.
You know, we heard from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo yesterday after that meeting up here in New York. He talked about kind of the process, about the idea that there's going to be some rocky terrain and that they are aware of that and kind of looking at this as the long game. But it appears to me that, you know, things are moving pretty smoothly or pretty quickly the last couple days here. You have a much better sense of that than I do. What are you and your colleagues down in D.C. talking about?
It's fascinating to me because I think you're right, Zachary, that things are moving very quickly and there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we even know about. At the same time, the president has been tempering expectations and saying maybe we can't get everything done in the one day. So this went from it's going to be mano a mano, the president and Kim Jong-un together in Singapore, and they're going to agree to complete and total irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And lots of people said, well, that can't happen, and it can't happen without a lot of work being done, and it's not realistic to expect that. So we've seen some adjustments adjustments around the edges. The president will not admit that there's been changes, but the meetings that have happened at lower levels are exactly the kind of meetings that you need. You don't just walk into a summit like this and expect to get any sort of agreement between the two principals. All sorts of particulars have to get worked out in advance. So to me, this suggests that they're serious about it. This isn't just about the show of June 12th, though that's a piece of it. This is about two leaders that both want this summit to happen very desperately. The president has talked about it in terms of legacy terms. Kim Jong-un, we presume, because we haven't heard from him, we presume is thinking about it in terms of historic terms of what it means for his nation, opening up their economy, entering the world at large, according to President Trump. So this is exactly the kind of work that has to happen. There's some theatrics and things that get seen in front of the cameras, like this hand-delivered letter, and like the ultimate meeting if it happens June 12th. But the hard work has to be done in advance and then afterward. And to me, the signal is that both sides want that hard work to happen.
You know, I don't remember there ever being a time where there's been so much talk about the talk. You know, and I'm and I'm wondering, you know, to kind of use a sports analogy here. I don't know if is there such a thing as a small victory here? For example, you look at the Cavs last night. Clearly, they didn't win the big game, but maybe there's some positive takeaways. If this meeting doesn't happen, is there still something positive or in terms of political points that Trump can hang his hat on here?
Well, Cavs fan may disagree about any kind of symbolic victories out of that.
Symbolic, that's what I was looking for, absolutely.
Look like LeBron was trying pretty hard. He's tired the next day. And there's actually something similar that might happen in diplomacy. If you get really close and it doesn't happen, what's the next step after that? And if they actually have the meeting, people that I've talked to in national security circles have said, usually this meeting happens at the end of a very long process. It appears that President Trump is trying to turn that on its head. And I believe, Zachary, we're looking now, this is the Oval Office itself. The camera's getting in there. If you get just the tiniest glimpse of what might be going on the other side before any cameras are allowed in, before we get a readout, it's a pretty fascinating shot right now. We believe that's where this top North Korean official, the head of their nuclear program, is actually having a conversation with the president himself, delivering, we believe, hand-delivering a letter from Kim Jong-un.
Rick Klein with us down in Washington, D.C., giving us some insight there. We're watching this visual here at the White House as the North Korean envoy arrives there. Rick, thank you so much. We're going to pivot now and go over to Martha Raddatz. She's at the ABC Bureau down there. Martha, you were up here in New York City yesterday at this press conference that Secretary of State had. You tried to pin him down on if and when we would learn if this meeting would happen. Are you hearing anything new today?
Really nothing new today. As you know, Secretary Pompeo said yesterday he didn't really know when this would officially be announced, if it would officially be announced, but he said it again and again that he really did think that the North Koreans were ready to put themselves on a path forward. Now, one of the things we have heard since then, as we wait for President Trump to either read or just accept this letter from Kim Jong-un, obviously there are translators in there, is we heard from the North Koreans this morning from Kim Jong-un saying they are reaffirming the commitment to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, saying they hope for a phased process. This could be solved by a stage-by-stage basis. I think what he's also meaning in there is he'd like to see sanctions relief on a phased basis. You know, President Trump has said he wants this all at once, and then in the end, there would be sanctions relief once those nuclear weapons were out of the way and gotten rid of. But I think what the North Koreans would really want in this is some sort of economic relief, and I don't think that's something the White House has ruled out, even though President Trump has made it very clear what he prefers is to have the entire thing done. You've also heard President Trump say this might take more than one meeting. It might take several meetings to solve this. I think that's what the North Koreans are saying as well. You know, you think about this letter that's being delivered now, and yesterday in New York City, when Secretary Pompeo announced it, you had to wonder what was in that letter because it was probably written before, not something that was sent to him just yesterday after that meeting. So my take on that is they made enough progress, and the North Koreans feel that as well, that they would deliver this letter to President Trump, either saying, look, we would like to go ahead with this, or we'll have to just wait and see what that letter says.
We're back on this shot now of that window in the Oval Office. You know, Martha, it's hard for me not to, think about the reality TV star here, right? I mean, just the optics of this, the world watching this, and you mentioned what the president prefers. One thing that we do know he prefers is kind of pandering to his ego, and the idea that this envoy is going to come down and hand deliver this letter. How do you make sense of all this?
Well, it is all very dramatic. And of course, the North Koreans have been watching President Trump as well, and they know he likes a drama like this. Other world leaders have responded in the same way to President Trump. You've got all those cameras out there. You've got all the White House press corps out there waiting. You've got us here waiting patiently to see what's in that letter, what it means, whether President Trump will come out and make some sort of announcement. Or whether it will be by tweet, or whether he'll string us along for another week or so. He said the announcement could come at any time or not. And as President Trump likes to say, we'll just have to wait and see.
Just have to wait and see. I mean, we talked about kind of, as we have over and over again with this president, kind of his unorthodox approach, the idea that, in prior administrations, conversations like this would have probably happened behind the scenes. You get work done, you build up to the big meeting. It really seems like he's really thrown the whole thing on its head, and he's doing things his way once again.
He is, and I think everyone was so startled when they announced that there would be a summit with the two world leaders without anything building up to that, or no diplomatic build up to that. But I think when you look at the last week or so, since that has been canceled, that things have gone back to a more traditional manner, because you've got Secretary of State Mike Pompeo involved now. You've got lower level officials now involved trying to work out these details. So I think in many ways it has gone back to a more traditional role. Now what we're seeing right now is not really very traditional at all. I think John Carlin would tell you that it's the only the second time in history that a North Korean leader has been in the White House, and we have that happening again right now with that letter. So President Trump does like to do things his way, and this is a very different way to do it. But there has been a lot of legwork in the last week or so. The planning has gone on, despite the fact that the summit was abruptly canceled. So maybe in the end, that's a good thing. They got all these sticking points, or some of them anyway, out of the way. Mike Pompeo said yesterday, as you know, Zachary, that there could be bad days, there could be tough times. There were in the room. Secretary Pompeo said that they would, toss back and forth ideas, and he'd get some tossed right back at him. But it seems they have ironed out a few of the details that might not have been ironed out before.
Martha Raddatz for us down at the ABC Bureau in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to pivot now and go back to Rick Klein. I'm curious, Rick, we just saw John Kelly earlier. We saw John Bolton, Chief of Staff and National Security Advisor. I'm curious to use some TV lingo. Who's producing this moment? Is this Trump, or is he leaning on some of the other folks he has around him to get where we are right now?
My hunch is that the president is his own executive producer on this one. And there may be other people that are figuring out some of the logistics of it, but the idea of bringing into the Oval Office a top-ranking official of North Korea, that is a classic Trump move. And I think Martha's right that a lot of this has been a return to normalcy, so to speak, after some very abnormal things were said between the two leaders, and then the extraordinary announcement of a summit and the cancellation. But there are some flourishes here that to me suggest that Trump has an eye on what Kim Jong-un looks for. It's a sign of the utmost respect to personally receive an envoy like this. Keep in mind, North Koreans aren't even free to travel around the United States. Most of them can't leave the country themselves, but even their diplomats are tightly controlled in what they can do under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. And this is, again, the highest ranking such official to be in the United States, to be at the White House in almost 20 years. It means something. And the president recognizes the power, the pageantry, the imagery, and recognizes, he believes, that his counterpart in North Korea is someone who would respond in kind.
We're pretty email heavy around here, but I should note that I do like handwritten letters. So I can understand where he's coming
It's a bit
from.
of a throwback, isn't it? It's also
It
you know,
is. It's a
when you
lost
get a letter
art.
these days, often it's a PDF that's emailed. It's like this is actually hand delivered. I can't remember one like this in Washington since the president fired James Comey. As a matter of fact, it is a bit of a throwback in how you do business. All this anticipation about what's in the letter, how do you open the letter, is it in English? A lot of questions to get answered.
That's a great question. Is it in English? Is it, in cursive? Does he read the letter on the spot? Does he set it on the table? I mean, it's a really interesting thing. One of the things that I'm really fascinated about, Rick, is what is the Trump's administration sell to North Koreans that says this is what you ought to do because on the backside of this you're going to reap these rewards. This is why it makes sense for you to do this.
Sure. Now, the president has dangled fortune, if not fame, in front of Kim Jong-un. And his basic sell is, look, your country is stuck, isolated, battered by sanctions, a rogue regime that no one most of the countries on the planet won't even have a relationship with. And you can't keep the lights on at night. Your people are impoverished and dying of starvation. Welcome to the 21st century. And this is your ticket into modernity. This is your ticket into the wealth of other nations. The president has been explicit about that. He'll be rich. He'll be wealthy. His country moves along. And Trump's essential calculation is that Kim Jong-un, unlike his father, unlike his grandfather, views himself as a transformational figure inside his own country and is willing to do things that are far beyond what his predecessors would do, where they viewed themselves in very high-minded, deific, really godly ways, that they viewed everything they did as exactly right. I interviewed earlier this week Bill Richardson, who has spent North Korea now 8 times. He met with Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, to negotiate hostage releases. He was a go-to guy for North Korean relations under Republican and Democratic presidents. And he said you just have to know that the North Koreans think differently than the American side. They think about it in terms of these infallible ways, that they believe that the supreme leader has the divine mandate. And that's the kind of way that you have to appeal to someone like that. And I think the President Trump, with a lot of the bluster and now a lot of the flattery, has tried to appeal to Kim Jong-un's ego and trying to appeal to a man in his mid-30s who is not necessarily secure in the job. There's always the concern about a coup, who may be thinking, okay, here's my time to cash in all my chips. And if I give up nuclear weapons, it means that I'm secure, my people are more prosperous. It's a big gamble because there's been nothing, literally nothing in North Korean behavior before that made you think that he may want to do this. But the president has felt from the beginning that he could understand this man. And if he gets him in the room, he can get him to agree to something that would be unthinkable.
We were talking about this yesterday. I think it came up in conversation yesterday with Martha. We were talking about, I think she mentioned kind of this vision in the fortunes involved. And it made me think after the fact, if Trump is pitching a future that reflects, the ideals that America was built on, or if it's the new America. We know about the income inequality here. We know that there are 2 different Americas at least. And I'm just curious, is this a vision for North Korea where there's a shared vision and a shared path moving forward for everyone, or the haves and the have-nots?
I think you have to back it up even a half step from there, Zachary, and realize that the North Korean vision of what America is nowhere near the reality. This is a place that routinely uses imagery of American landmarks being destroyed by North Korean means, that depicts through a manipulated media the Americans as evil players on the world stage. And so that's the starting point that all of this comes from, and that's why it seems so unthinkable that you'd have these conversations. As for whether the president is pitching a version of liberal Jeffersonian democracy to the North Koreans, I have a hard time seeing that. Now, we don't know what he's having private conversations about, but something tells me this isn't going to end in free and open democratic elections in North Korea. That would be orders orders of magnitude beyond what could be expected. I think much more realistic to expect is that the United States, as part of recognizing North Korea, also recognizes that there are certain brutalities in the human rights world and in terms of civil liberties, in terms of treatment of their own people, that just aren't going to change. This president, above even other previous presidents, hasn't really prioritized that, and he has shown his relationship on the world stage to be very transactional. If you're willing to work with him on something, he's willing to say nice things about you, and he doesn't seem that interested in what he would consider domestic priorities. So I think it's a while before you can expect American airliners to arrive carrying American tourists who'd have free roam of North Korea like you might in Western Europe or in Canada or Mexico or other allies. I think we're a ways away from anything like that.
It's a good point you bring up related to kind of the way things are done over there. You bring up human rights violations and things like that, and at the same time, this president has shown a fascinating ability to compartmentalize, and it appears that maybe he's doing the same thing here, right?
Yeah, I mean, he views this as about nuclear weapons. I don't think that anyone should pretend that it's about something other than that at this stage. That the president views nuclear weapons as an existential threat to the world. Frankly, we know that President Obama, in his one meeting with President Trump, told him North Korea is the biggest issue that you're going to have to confront. And we've had almost no visibility to what's going on inside that nation. We have worse intelligence assets on the ground, or the smallest amount probably anywhere on the globe. Literally, the place goes dark at night. You can see it on the satellite imagery. So going from that stage to the president saying, look, I think I can deal with this guy, it has to do with this issue of taking nuclear weapons off the table. And again, it's this calculation that the North Korean regime, Kim Jong-un, are willing to just think differently than they have the entirety of their history, and say, despite the rhetoric and the behavior of the last 70 years, that yes, we are willing to walk into the community of nations. That, by the way, I think is why the comment about the Libya model seemed to throw things off a couple of weeks ago. When John Bolton talked about the Libya model, he of course was talking about Gaddafi's decision to negotiate the end of his nuclear program under the Bush administration. However, the Libya model didn't end that well for Gaddafi himself. Through other forces where the United States wasn't directly involved, Gaddafi, of course, lost his life. That regime was upended, and that happened under the Obama administration. So that piece of it, I don't know that you can talk about Libya without thinking about both parts of that conversation, and that's, I think, why the North Koreans reacted so negatively to that comment. They viewed it as a threat on their supreme leader, and Kim Jong-un doesn't want to see a regime change. He's going to look for guarantees of his own security as part of this.
Again, a window into the Oval Office, a window into what's going on over there today, provided by my colleague down there in Washington, D.C., Rick Klein. We're talking about the talk, when it could happen, how it could happen. Of course, Kim Yong-chol at the White House today, meeting with President Trump to personally deliver a letter from Kim Jong-un. This is all about trying to get to that summit and denuclearize North Korea. All this talk about nukes, all this talk about, this weight that North Korea has over there. Forgive me if I'm getting off page here, but what are our nuclear capabilities here in the U.S., Rick?
Well, the president said that his nuclear button is bigger than Kim Jong-un's, and that his works. He's right. Our nuclear capabilities are far and away the best in the world. I believe any expert would tell you that there's the capacity to reach any target at virtually any time. That has not changed. The president has talked about the need to reinforce the nuclear arsenal, despite agreements from previous administrations that have sort of built it down. But the idea of overwhelming force and the ability to obliterate any part of the world at any time remains part of the American capabilities. Keep in mind, when we talk about North Korea right now, there's a reason that when they sent a top diplomat over to the United States, he had to fly commercial. They don't have airliners that could even get here. Their capabilities in terms of nuclear weapons are vast and have expanded greatly, but it's nothing like what the United States is capable of doing. And that's why when the president said fire and fury and locked and loaded and made these threats, they had to be viewed in a very real sense. And I wonder when the story of this is all done, Zachary, how much of this is going to be about President Trump trying to one-up Kim Jong-un at his own game and trying to match the rhetoric, blustery statement for blustery statement, recognizing maybe, just maybe, that's the one way you can get through to the guy.
Rick Klein, I really appreciate your time down there. We're going to sign off here. A historic day at the White House, hand-delivered letter by the North Korean envoy. What a time we're in. Again, I'm Zachary Keish here in New York.